You ever get the feeling we're living inside the season finale of some long-running empire? Like, things still kind of function, the lights are still on, the money still works, the army is still huge, but underneath it all there's this weird nervous energy. People are stressed, the debts keep climbing, stuff costs more, politics feels insane, and every side keeps screaming that the other side is the one destroying everything. Here's the uncomfortable question. What if this isn't new? What if this is just what the end of an empire always feels like? Because when you zoom out far enough, Rome, the British Empire, and modern America all ran the exact same script. Different languages, different flags, different technology, same loop. The debt empire loop. You start with strength, real strength, productivity, discipline, military power, people actually respect. Then you start using that power to borrow. At first it's for important things. Wars, infrastructure, stability. Then, it's for everything. Bread and circuses, welfare and tax cuts, endless wars and cheap stuff at home. And little by little, the empire goes from "we earned this" to "we're entitled to this." That's when debt stops being a tool and becomes the fuel. So let's walk through this loop, not as some boring history lecture, but like we're doing an autopsy on three massive bodies: Rome on the slab, the British Empire on the slab, and modern America slowly being wheeled in. And your job as you listen is to keep asking yourself, where are we on this curve? And how much of this sounds disturbingly familiar? All right, let's start with Rome. When Rome started, it wasn't some decadent superpower with marble and gladiators. It was a tough, disciplined, borderline-obsessed little republic. Citizens fought in the army themselves. They had this hardcore culture of duty and sacrifice. Land ownership mattered. Honor mattered. They weren't out there with a credit card empire. They were out there with actual swords, building roads, fighting wars, collecting taxes, and physically controlling territory. The early Roman system was painful, but it worked. Citizens served in legions. They shared in the loot. They could actually move up. Rome built real stuff. Roads, aqueducts, cities. Productivity plus discipline equals power. That's phase one of the debt empire loop, real strength. But once they conquered enough, something shifts. You go from "we fight to survive" to "we fight to keep expanding" to "we fight because war just became the business model." Expansion brings wealth. Wealth brings inequality. The elites get richer. The regular citizens get sidelined. Suddenly, you've got a massive empire to manage, borders to protect, legions to pay, infrastructure to maintain, politicians to bribe, mobs in the capital to keep calm. And here's the thing, all of that costs money, a lot of money. As the empire gets bigger, so do the bills. So how do you pay for it? At first, you pay with actual resources, taxes, plunder, and tributes, but those start to dry up or become unstable. You can't just loot forever. People resist, conquests slow down, so Rome quietly shifts from earn then spend to promise then borrow. They start debasing the currency. This is the ancient equivalent of printing money. The silver coins that once actually had solid silver in them. Over time, the silver content goes down. The coins still look similar, they still have the emperor's face, they're still money. But under the surface, they're worth less. Sound familiar yet? Debasing the currency is step one of the debt loop. It's the empire saying, we don't want to raise taxes too much, we don't want to cut spending, we don't want to shrink the army, so we'll cheat quietly instead. They keep the show going. The army still marches, the grain still arrives, the games still happen. But behind the scenes, the money is rotting. As that happens, soldiers start demanding more pay. The borders are under pressure. Political fights turn into civil wars. Generals march on Rome. Emperors rise and fall non-stop. Every new ruler solves the crisis with more spending, more bribes, more short-term fixes. Rome becomes this massive machine powered by bad debt and bad money. If you jump to the end of the story, people talk about barbarians at the gates like that's what ended Rome. And yeah, invaders were real. But by the time the barbarians showed up, Rome had already hollowed itself out with debt, corruption, debasement, and internal decay. The invaders didn't topple a strong empire. They pushed over something that was already wobbling. That's Rome. Now, let's jump forward over 1,000 years and look at the British Empire. Totally different setting. Gunpowder, ships, colonies, trade, industrial revolution. Britain is not a bunch of Roman legions marching around. It's factories, coal, steam engines, and the Royal Navy ruling the oceans. But the loop is the same. Britain starts as this scrappy island with strong institutions, rule of law, and a culture of trade and industry. They develop advanced finance early. Bonds, stock markets, central banking. They figure out how to mobilize capital. Phase 1, strength. They produce, they innovate, they build ships, they colonize. British government debt during the rise was huge at times, but it was backed by genuine power. A dominant navy, global trade routes, industrial capacity. People trusted that Britain could pay. The pound sterling becomes the world's reserve currency. London becomes the financial center of the planet. Empire plus money equals influence over everything. That's phase 2, dominance. But with dominance comes the addiction. Think about the temptation. You're the empire. Your navy controls trade. Your currency is the default. Other people willingly hold your bonds, so what do? You borrow. You borrow to fight wars on multiple continents. You borrow to maintain colonies scattered around the globe. You borrow to keep the show going at home. You promise pensions. You promise benefits. You promise the sort of stability that only works as long as the outside world believes you'll always be on top. Wars get more expensive. Technology gets more destructive. The costs of keeping an empire go up, not down. By the time you get to the late 19th and early 20th century, Britain is still powerful, but the cracks are forming. New powers show up. The US, Germany, later others. Britain is stretched thin, both militarily and financially. Then world wars hit. The First and Second World Wars are like a financial earthquake for the British Empire. They win, but it's a poisoned victory. They come out exhausted, bloodied, and buried in debt. Their gold reserves shrink. Their industries face competition. The US rises. To keep things together, they do what empires always do late stage. They lean harder into debt and hope the financial magic will cover the structural rot. But over time, the pound drops in status. The empire breaks apart. The colonies demand independence. The bills come due. Again, just like Rome, the external shocks, wars, rival powers, political upheavals, matter. But underneath them is the same pattern, a system that went from strength and real productivity to entitlement, overextension, and dependence on debt. And now, like it or not, we have to talk about modern America. Because the US is not some fragile little economy. It's been, by far, the most powerful country in the world for decades. Massive economy, massive military, massive cultural influence. The dollar became the reserve currency, the way the pound used to be, the way Rome's coinage once was in its sphere. Phase 1 for America was brutal but straightforward. Industrialization, innovation, war production, and a huge amount of real productivity. Factories, railroads, tech, infrastructure, sweat, steel, oil. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. Phase 2 is right after World War II. The US comes out with intact factories, huge gold reserves, a strong military, and a booming economy. The dollar gets tied to gold for a while, and other currencies tie themselves to the dollar. This is the dominant stage. If you want to trade, you use dollars. If you want to save, you hold US bonds. If you want safety, you run to the US financial system. And just like Rome and Britain, once that dominance solidifies, the temptation is too strong. You can borrow in your own currency. You can issue debt that other people actually want. You can run deficits and the world shrugs and says, "Sure, we'll take your paper." So gradually, balanced budgets become a joke. Deficits become normal. Debt ceases to be an emergency and becomes the operating system. You pay for wars with debt. You pay for welfare with debt. You pay for tax cuts with debt. You pay for bailouts with debt. You pay for stimulus with debt. The left and the right scream at each other about what to spend on, but both sides quietly accept the same thing. The empire lives on credit now. That's the core of the debt empire loop. First, you earn your power. Then, you finance it. Then, you extend it. Then you use debt not just to grow, but to avoid hard choices. And when people start asking, "Hey, is this sustainable?" you say, "We're different. We're special. This time is different." But it's not. It never is. Modern America, just like late-stage Rome and late-stage Britain, faces the same pressures: a giant, expensive military footprint around the world, an aging population that needs support, internal divisions that make real reforms almost impossible, A financial system that assumes the party will never stop, and the numbers are getting insane. Trillions in government debt, massive corporate borrowing, households living on credit, an economy that panics when interest rates move a tiny bit up because everything, everywhere is leveraged. This is what late-stage empire looks like financially. The whole system is wired to debt. And here's the cruel part. It feels normal while it's happening. If you were a Roman citizen during the late empire, you weren't walking around saying, "Ah yes, we are in the final stage of a civilization's debt cycle." You were saying, "Why is everything more expensive? Why is there so much corruption? Why is the army always in crisis? Why are politicians insane?" If you lived in late-stage British Empire times, you weren't thinking in terms of decline of the pound as a reserve currency. You were thinking, why are we always at war? Why is the economy so unstable? Why are our debts so huge? Why is everything getting sold off? If you live in modern America, or under its financial shadow, you don't wake up thinking, "I live in a debt empire near the end of its loop." You wake up thinking, why do prices keep rising? Why is everything financed? Why does my government always choose debt instead of real solutions? Same confusion, same symptoms, same pattern. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but how do they actually blow up? Like, what does the end look like? Here's the tricky part. Empires rarely just explode in one dramatic instant. It's not always some Hollywood moment where everything collapses in a single day. It's more like this. Step 1. The bills start to matter. Interest payments on the debt get huge. More and more of the empire's income goes just to servicing the past. Step 2. To deal with that, they debase the currency or print money in some form. Rome literally melted down coins. Britain devalued the pound. Modern systems use central banks and complex finance, but it's the same impulse. Stretch the money to cover the gap. Step 3. Inflation, instability, and loss of confidence slowly creep in. People don't trust the currency as much. Other nations start diversifying away. Allies hedge their bets. Ordinary people feel squeezed and angry. Step 4. Political extremes rise. When the financial foundation is cracking, politics gets crazy. Populists, extremists, strongmen, utopians, everyone promises a different fix, but they all need the same thing: more resources, which usually means more debt or more aggressive tricks with money. Step 5. Some kind of shock hits the system. War, financial crisis, internal revolt, pandemic, whatever. And suddenly, the empire doesn't have the spare capacity to absorb the hit. That's when the loop snaps. It might be a default. It might be a currency reset. It might be the quiet transfer of power to a new center somewhere else. Rome lost control of its frontiers and eventually the city itself. Britain lost the financial and military capacity to keep its empire, and the center of gravity moved to the US. Modern America? We don't know the final chapter yet. We're living it. But the shape of it is obvious enough if you're willing to step back. You can't keep running an empire-sized lifestyle on an overdraft forever. At some point, either A, you accept a painful reset, you cut back, you restructure debt, you shrink your global ambitions, you let the currency fall, you let standards of living adjust, and you try to rebuild from something more honest. Or B, you deny reality, kick the can, print, borrow, patch, repress, distract, until reality forces a reset on you on much worse terms at a much more chaotic moment. Rome basically chose option B. Britain tried a messy version of A after being forced into it. America, it's still in denial mode, still betting that because it's special, it can bend the rules of math. Here's why this matters to you personally. You can't control the empire. You can't fix the debt. You can't rewrite the entire global system. But you can stop being surprised by it. You can stop thinking that these things, massive debt, endless war spending, political insanity, inflation spikes, currency drama, are random or disconnected. They're not random. They are features of a system in the late stages of the debt empire loop. And when you know that, you stop asking, why are things getting so chaotic? And start asking, okay, how do I position myself so I'm not the one left holding the bag when the loop closes? If you were living in late Rome, knowing what you know now, would you hold all your wealth in a currency they were actively debasing? Would you trust every promise from a government that changed leaders every other year? Would you build your entire life on the assumption that Rome would last forever? If you were living in late-stage British Empire days, would you assume the pound would be king for eternity? Or might you look across the ocean and notice something new rising? That's the mental shift. Because right now, a lot of people are still mentally living in phase 2, the dominance phase, even though the system is clearly somewhere between phase 3 and 4, addiction and erosion, heading toward mutation. You don't have to panic. Panic doesn't help, but you do have to stop being naive. Empires blow up the same way because humans are the same. We get successful, we get entitled, we buy comfort now and push the cost into the future. Then we convince ourselves the bill will somehow never arrive. Rome did it with coins and grain doles for the urban poor and endless military campaigns. Britain did it with colonial wars, global naval commitments, and welfare promises. America is doing it with social programs, defense budgets, tax games, bailouts, and a financial sector that acts like gravity doesn't apply if you're big enough. Different tools. Same mentality. The debt empire loop is not just about numbers. It's about psychology. Step 1, discipline. Step 2, power. Step 3, entitlement. Step 4, denial. Step 5, collapse or transformation. You and I are living in the denial part, watching the numbers on the screen keep climbing, listening to people insist that it's manageable as long as we just tweak this or that. But math doesn't care about politics, and history doesn't care about feelings. Rome thought it was forever. Britain thought the sun never sets on their empire. America talks about being the indispensable nation. Every empire has a story that says, we're permanent. Every empire also has a debt chart that eventually says, no, you're not. So the next time you hear about debt ceilings, deficits, bond markets, inflation reports, currency moves, don't tune out. Don't just shrug and say, it's boring or it's complicated. It's not just economics, it's the vital signs of the empire you live under. And if you pay attention, you can at least understand what's happening as Rome 2.0 or Britain 2.0 plays out in slow motion around you. The debt empire. Loop doesn't care if you believe in it. It just keeps doing what it's always done. Empires rise on discipline. They peak on power. They drift into addiction. They rot under the weight of their own promises. And then one day, everyone pretends they didn't see it coming. You don't have to be one of those people.